suggested levels.
Well, but an annual average is a lot different than not to exceed.
Yeah, but what is the basis of 55? And is that
Right.
and is that a maximum, or is that was that? I mean, that has no basis in the sense that I can tell scientifically, and it is not based on a particular time measurement. So the measurement issue cuts across. I mean,
Yes.
Putting in a sentence saying this was a annual average, that's fine, but we still have to define the sampling time.
Yep.
To me, a really big issue is, before we talk about specific, we've had this debate before, but the issue to me is whether establishing a range within which communities can decide what level to use in their community, to me, is not helpful to communities. They're looking for more guidance from this committee, this WIN working group, than a range, just to tell them what levels are being used and that have been adopted in the state and other states, or maybe even other countries. I think the numbers range from 35 to 75 right now, DBA. Is not helpful to communities. And I have that's the only problem I have with this, although I really applaud your attempt to compromise, come up with a compromise position, because I think in the end we were looking at ultimately possibility that we're going to deadlock and we're going to have two reports, which again would not be helpful if we can't agree as a small committee. Is that going to be helpful to larger committee and to the public and to communities?
Well, considering the way that the World Health Organization recommendation can be interpreted under different measurement scenarios, and I can't support this at this time, but would the group be interested in a kind of a recommendation at 45 dBA at the residence, at measured like we had talked about in the past, an 8-hour range period?
Well, I don't want to have to defend a given level again. I mean, we get back into that same rut we've been in before. But my personal view is that 45 is okay in the daytime, but at night there's evidence that 45 is really disruptive to sleep. It's annoying, it's disruptive. A lot of complaints occur in communities where 45 or more is allowed at night.
Yeah, let me, we talked about this before. Part of the concern I have actually with the way this is done too is the kind of the connection between annoyance and complaints and kind of reality. And that's not a real sound scientific basis for kind of like adverse health impacts to kind of say, oh, people are annoyed, consequently maybe they can't sleep or they have certain health impacts. Because we don't really, right, and this is a question for everybody, we don't really know how many people have sleep disruption at different sound levels, right?
Well, as someone else has recently pointed out, there are no sleep experts on this panel. There are no psychology experts, although I have an undergraduate degree in psychology. I'm not a psychologist.
Okay.
But it's a psychological issue, and a lot of medical doctors, I don't know if Ken can speak to this or not, have some background enough to deal with questions or complaints about issues like annoyance. Ken has made, I think, some statements in his revision that indicate that exposure to noise at night has been established as causing adverse health effects. These effects include an increase in heart rate, changes in sleep stages, increased awakening, an increase in body movement during sleep, self-reported sleep disturbance, although a lot of the sleep disturbances are awakenings that people don't remember. Increased use of sleeping pills, self-reported health problems, and insomnia-like symptoms. That's the World Health Organization quotes there. So it's true that there's not a lot of sleep studies, and I more than anybody regret that, but I think it's because sleep studies require electrophysiological instrumentation. They require many nights of study with people in sleep experiments and so forth, and they're very hard. It's very hard to conduct those studies. And for example, brain studies, brain scan studies are hard to do with noise, because the noise of the instrumentation is a problem, I think, in fMRI, for example. There are ways to kind of tone it down and cancel it out through computers, but it's not an easy science. So,
You know, and I accept the fact that, you know, sleep disruption will, and there's a lot of research for this, will lead to adverse health impacts. I think that's well established. One thing I wonder about is, you know, the World Health Organization talks about, and I've heard other people talk about, you need 30 decibels in order to not have problems sleeping.
anybody.
Yeah, and then I think in terms of, as you know, from the information I sent to you, refrigerators are 35 to 45, older ones are even higher. And so I just wonder how that works if we can't sleep above 30, then none of us are sleeping because we all have refrigerators.
I'm not sure where you're bringing up 30, because that's not in their document. I mean, the lowest level they talk about is 32, and it has to do with motility, GI motility. And so I would contend that what I wrote here that was highlighted is an accurate summary of the medical literature in the World Health Organization on the effects of noise. And I did not, I took your point about annoyance, and if you can see, I didn't base it on annoyance.
I appreciate that.
And so, you know, annoyance, I talk about how you know, the only studies on wind turbines have been related to annoyance, and it's up to whoever is the regulating body if they want to use that or not. I mean, but I think the first part saying, you know, your sleep disturbance at certain noise levels, and that is 40, and that's what the World Health Organization is concluding, and that we know from sleep disturbance is associated with certain diseases, and then do have to make an assumption that wind turbine noise will have the same effect. And that's, but I think it's an accurate rendition of what's out there now.
I think it was, I think you did a good job. Let me ask you a question. You know, the World Health Organization does seem to make a distinction at 55 dBA.
Right.
Because they start using other language with respect to the impacts. So, and I don't know how they pick 55 dBA, but you know, their language changes significantly with respect to, they start talking about significant number of people, significant adverse cardiovascular impacts.
Right.
Before that, they're talking in terms of we're starting to see adverse impacts, and it's not clear again to me how many people are negatively impacted. Certainly there are some negatively impacted.
Won't they report percentages though, and not just say significant in the table, in that table, or?
Not the table.
No, so, and that's why when I came up with my suggestion, it basically was cluing into what came from the World Health Organization, 55 dBA with a margin of safety, reducing it by 5 dBA. One thing I would, let me throw this out as a suggestion too, kind of accepting what kind of Ken has written here. When we get into the next paragraph, the municipality may also wish to consider adopting a level between 40 and 55 dBA. What I would prefer to do there, rather than talk about annoyance, which I think, again, the linkage is not so clear, I would like to talk about some of the things that I brought up, like about the 55 dBA. And that is a point at which more severe...
About the refrigerator and those comparisons?
Well, no, I'm talking about in the World Health Organization, they start talking about, you know, 55 dBA, you start seeing significant numbers affected, significant adverse impacts, and basically talk about the recommendation I had made as a guideline for what a local government might wish to consider.
So to me, as I said, you know, since that wasn't the level I was supporting, was that this sixth paragraph, you would, and I didn't pull your old language, that would be markedly expanded. It's this one.
Okay.
Well, this is to the 40 to 55, but I mean, that this one be expanded to give more rationale for the 55 dBA.
But that would mean you would leave in figure 1 from Peterson, or figures 1 and 2?
Well, that gets into, to me, again, I'm not saying that annoyance is a health effect,
Yep.
but to me, if I were making the decision, it's something that I think is important to consider. I mean, I think, and it's stated as annoyance, it's not stated as a health effect. I mean, you might, we could talk on wording changes, but it's stated as annoyance, and that, is for the regulatory authority to decide. Do they want to regulate on annoyance? I mean, there's nothing to say.
Well, you're on shaky legal ground if you start regulating on annoyance.
Regulate on annoyance, public health regulates. You can't have garbage in your front yard, or you gotta mow the grass, or you have to mow the grass, you can't have weeds, I don't know, there are all kinds of public health regulations that are based on annoyance.
Well, but keep in mind, every government action annoys a certain number of people, and in some cases, they annoy
Well,
the
so
majority of people.
So that's for the municipality to decide. If they feel they can't regulate on that, then they won't regulate on it.
Well, the concern I have is by putting in a document that has to do with public health, we're implying that it's a public health issue.
I think annoyance is a public health issue. I think
We've established that.
Well, when there's a noisy party next door, and it just happens once a year, and it's annoying, I think, somebody calls the police, and it's a regulatory issue.
Can I ask Julie what she thinks about this annoyance issue?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you've discussed this with anyone or have your own views, but.
I haven't discussed this with John, but I too have a little trouble making the direct connection between annoyance and sleep. And I know I brought this up, I brought it up before, and I think to base a recommendation on something where I just can't get there yet on the direct link.
Well, most of the studies that deal with annoyance are surveys, right? I mean, you ask people if you're annoyed, and I can't believe that when we're annoyed, or when we're having sleep disturbance, from reasons they can attribute to wind turbines, that it wouldn't be included in those data. But on the other hand, it's hard to separate it out when it's not specifically analyzed or collected as specific data. There are studies being done now that are, I think, actually going to be published soon, but we don't have them in front of us. But Nissenbaum's studies in Maine, in which he's applied one or two sleep indexes that are widely used in the country to measure sleep disturbance, and he used those indexes, one or two, or maybe both of them. One of them was the Pittsburgh, I believe, sleep index. I can't remember the other one, but he's going to have some data real soon to show that there are some definite linkages between sleep disturbance and wind turbine noise. And I think he also shows some distance effects, that the closer, the more sleep disturbance there is. And I don't know if it's going to be a nice, clear-cut relationship, but it's certainly more than we have now.
Do you know, is he measuring, will there be actual sound measurements outside people's bedroom windows, or is computer modeling?
I don't know. I haven't seen the methodology described. I've seen a summary of the data, but it's on the internet. But again, it's not yet published, and so obviously you could say again that it's not peer-reviewed scientific literature.
Let me throw out a suggestion about the discussion of annoyance. Okay, because we've heavily discussed the studies, and I think it's been helpful to get a handle on what's going on out there. What if, and we probably need in this document to have some discussion about what we review, what we discussed. What if we move that section up before this section and basically address it as this is something we discussed and looked at, and take out the language basically which is provides information that may be useful to communities, because that's where I have, I mean, that basically implies that you should take this into consideration when you make your decisions, which I have a hard time with.
Apparently. Is part of that suggestion to leave out the Peterson et al. Data on annoyance?
No.
Leave that in as part of that?
I'm suggesting we move it into a part of the report where we talk about what we've read and discussed, and just eliminate the word which may be useful.
And then what would your or maybe you wouldn't have a third alternative, so there's the 55 alternative, there's the 40 alternative. what is the rationale for a 45 or 50 ohm?
Well, I suggested 50 dBA as a standard.